Welcome to Roots and Rights, a podcast from the Balasan Initiative for Human Rights that guides you through the most critical human rights issues facing Palestine today. I'm your host, Dalia Qumsieh, founder and director of Balasan. Today's episode is the final installment of a 4-part series that takes a deep dive into the ID classification system. We will dissect the elements that govern the Palestinian refugees and Palestinians living in the diaspora. If you missed the last few episodes, we recommend you go back and have a listen. The Palestinian diaspora represents a widespread community of Palestinians who have been displaced through several waves of escalated events, wars, or intifadas. The Palestinian diaspora encompasses individuals who were displaced during past conflicts and their descendants, as well as those who have left more recently due to the ongoing hardships and displacements imposed by Israel. Estimates indicate that nearly 50% of Palestinians live outside of Palestine. Among them, above 5 million live in Arab countries, 44% of total, and about 700,000 live throughout the world. As a result of this worldwide displacement, Palestinians have been exposed to varied cultural, social, and political conditions and have been granted different civil rights and legal status. Palestinian refugees who live in Syria and Lebanon are considered stateless. In Jordan, many Palestinians living in refugee camps are stateless while others could attain citizenship. None of these refugees could return to Palestine as a result of Israel's denial of the right to return for them. Palestinian refugees in Lebanon and Syria often face severe restrictions on employment, social services, and civil rights. In Jordan, many Palestinians have integrated into society, enjoying citizenship and full rights. Palestinian refugees and diaspora members who obtain foreign passports can technically enter Palestine as foreigners, requiring a 3-month Israeli tourist visa, although they are regularly subjected to harassment, humiliation, and arbitrary entry denial because of their Palestinian origins and roots. Recently, Israel has announced its plans to introduce the Electronic Travel Authorization, known as ETA, for incoming visitors, currently a pilot program that will become mandatory for all visitors from visa-exempt countries in late 2024. The ETA system will collect information of incoming travelers before their arrival and grant them authorization for entry online. While the ETA system has been implemented by many other countries around the world, there is a major concern that Israel will use this tool in screening out travelers before their arrival in an arbitrary manner, facilitating its denial of entry policy against Palestinians who are dual nationals or those who have Palestinian origins, as well as those whom it punishes for having affiliations with the Palestinian cause. The right of return for Palestinian refugees is a cornerstone of Palestinian national identity and has been recognized as an inalienable right at various international forums, including the United Nations. However, the implementation of this right has been met with persistent refusal by Israel, citing demographic and security concerns as a reason to prevent allowing Palestinian refugees to return to their original homeland. The ID system, thus, serves as an arbitrary policy to further fragment the Palestinian society in Palestine and cut it off from its continuation in the diaspora. It seeks the erasure of a unified Palestinian identity. The ID system also effectively deprives Palestinians from their inalienable right to self-determination as one people, which is a core principle of international customary law, binding to all states and additionally confirmed in multiple international conventions and treaties that are binding to Israel as well. The inability of the Palestinian people to exercise their right to self determination as a whole, as a result of Israel's population control, does not only apply to Palestinians inside the OPT and Israel, it extends to Palestinian refugees who were forcibly displaced by Israel and are still prevented from returning to their homes, 7 decades since their expulsion. The exclusion of Palestinian refugees remains at the heart of Israel's demographic policies, resulting in multiple grave violations against this population, including their right to return, their right to self determination, the right to leave and return to their country, the right to a nationality, and the right to freedom of movement and residence. Such rights are anchored in 4 separate bodies of international law: the law of nationality as applied upon state succession, humanitarian law, human rights law, and refugee law, a subset of human rights law which also incorporates humanitarian law, and multiple international conventions and treaties under them. It is evident that Israel retains exclusive control over Palestinian population registry on both sides of the Green Line, besides controlling the entry conditions, if permitted, of Palestinian diaspora members and preventing the return of Palestinian refugees. It is also evident that this artificial categorization of Palestinians into different coded IDs is discriminatory of nature and seeks to divide Palestinians on the one hand and forcibly transfer them on the other. Israel's system of control has been built and maintained over decades by successive Israeli governments across all territories that they have controlled, regardless of the political party in power at the time. Indeed, Israel has subjected different groups of Palestinians to different sets of discriminatory laws, policies, and practices at different times, responding to the territorial gains it made first in 1948, during the Nakba, and then in the War of 1967, when it annexed East Jerusalem and occupied the rest of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Over decades, Israeli demographic and geopolitical considerations have shaped policies towards the Palestinians in each of these territorial domains in different ways. This means that today, Israel's system of control is not applied uniformly across all areas. Palestinians experience this system in different ways and face differing levels of repression based on their status and the area in which they live. Palestinians experience this system in different ways and face differing levels of repression based on their status and the area in which they live. They are subjected to different forms and shapes of discrimination that are both strategic and necessary to build a Jewish majority state, gradually forcing Palestinians to transfer from their homeland. The segregation and fragmentation resulting from this ID regime not only shakes the fabric of the Palestinian society, but also visibly violates international laws and conventions. However, Israel enacts these policies and legalizes them with international impunity. The implications of the population registry policies extend beyond mere administrative or state built control. They also manifest in denial of basic rights, economic marginalizations, and the erosion of Palestinian presence all across Palestine. In short, the ID system operates as a tool of carefully designed systematic segregation and oppression, perpetuating a hierarchy that privileges Jewish Israelis while depriving Palestinians from their right to exist on their lands. This institutionalized discrimination has, for instance, prevented thousands of Palestinian families from living under the same roof, sharing the same official document, land, and rights over the past 75 years. The list of the implications of the arbitrary ID system on Palestinian life just keeps piling up with time, leaving Palestinians at the mercy of a regime that is both unaccountable and immune to any legal challenges in the favor of Palestinians. It is in this context and in this precise moment that international accountability is primordial, not only for safeguarding the legitimacy and integrity of international law, which Israel has been deliberately discarding without any consequences, but also for restoring the inalienable rights that Palestinians are entitled to over their own lands that have been violated deliberately and systematically over 7 decades in violation of almost the entire international legal system applicable to this situation. International community bears legal responsibility to respect and ensure respect for the said law in all circumstances, and accordingly to disseminate knowledge and repress breaches and grave breaches of it. States are under the obligation of non-recognition, non-cooperation, and non-assistance. Therefore, third states must not recognize any of Israel's acts that seek to impose permanent sovereignty over any part of the occupied Palestinian territory, nor the systems that Israel imposes on Palestinians to ensure such irreversible permanence. States must declare such acts null and void. With a dangerous imminent shift to de jure annexation, especially post October the 7th, which will exacerbate the impacts of the ID system, it is imperative that states immediately take a proactive approach ranging from diplomatic pressure, downgrading trade and cooperation relationship agreements, and adopting lawful countermeasures and sanctions to hold Israel accountable for its grave violations. The prohibition of racial segregation, of which the ID system is an integral part of, is even more so a rule of jus cogens, entailing obligations erga omnes, that is, obligations owed to the international community as a whole, and it must act to end it as such. In this particular moment, where Israel is committing acts of what the International Court of Justice referred to as plausible case of genocide in the Gaza Strip, along with the war crimes and crimes against humanity, as well as war crimes and crimes against humanity in the occupied Palestinian territory, and with the imminent threat of annexation of the occupied Palestinian territory in the West Bank, all contributing to a very alarming deterioration in an already multi-layered system of oppression against Palestinians, the international community bears an elevated responsibility for the delay in holding Israel accountable for the past decades and for the reluctance to do so immediately now. It is in this context of impunity for decades-long violations and crimes that Israel has been able not only to maintain its systematic oppression against Palestinian people and their land, but also to extend them and elevate the scale of the violations. While it is true that there are welcome political and legal motions globally for this purpose, including the recognition of the State of Palestine by an increasing number of European states, the ongoing cases before the ICJ, and the announcement by the International Criminal Court, they are still hindered with political considerations, inadequate in terms of their ability to cover all violations thematically and geographically, and remain unable to impose respect of international law and halt the grave violations on the ground. This will not materialize without third states respecting their obligations under international law and imposing targeted sanctions against Israel to coerce it to end all its violations, just as mandated under international law. With that, we conclude our episode and podcast series, and we thank you, our listeners, for joining us for the first season of our podcast, Truths and Rights. To make sure you never miss an episode, please follow us on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. You can also listen to us and access our human rights reports on our website at balasan.org. All links are in the show notes.